Welcome back to Out of the Fold. This episode is the conclusion of my conversation with Rachel Casey. If you haven't listened to the other parts of our conversation, please do so before listening to this one. No religious organizations, companies, or individuals were contacted for comment about any of the content of this episode. The views expressed are strictly those of the ones expressing them. When we left off, Rachel was talking about the role critical thinking played in her loss of faith. So I'd like to ask you something that might sound a little bit like philosophical, but I'm not trying to make it ridiculously complicated. But would you say that you don't believe in God because you sincerely think that there is no God, or would you say that you don't believe in God because you don't agree with the teachings people associate with God?
I don't think that any of the religions that I have seen, I don't think that any of their gods are real, at the very least. I mean, I'm not saying that there is for sure no God, but I really haven't seen any evidence of one.
Right.
You know, as far as I know, with the theories of how the world came about and, you know, how life came about, makes sense for how the world is. I think that if there was a God that had made everything, we would expect to see some very different things. You know, we would expect to see the human body designed a little bit better.
No playground next to a landfill, right? That sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and, you know, I always heard growing up, well, the human body is designed wonderfully. And I'm like, yeah, it is. It seems to work. You know, like, it does keep me alive. But now I realize that's all it does is keep me alive.
Right.
And sometimes barely at that. You know, I'm like, it barely does its job. It wasn't created by somebody who specifically designed it to do, like, to be at peak functionality, because it isn't at peak functionality. There's a lot of things wrong with it, and there's a lot of things that can easily go wrong with it.
Right.
So, I mean, now that's very obvious to me. And at the time, basically, the only basis I had to believe that the human body was wonderfully designed was just that it worked. You know, it's like, wow, like Jehovah makes my heart beat and stuff, and it makes me breathe, and I'm like now I'm just like, it keeps me alive. Yes. I don't know if that's a wonderful design or not, but there's a lot of things that can go wrong with that. You know, like the food tube being right next to the breathing tube. A lot can go wrong with that.
Yeah.
I don't see evidence of a creation God in the world. Obviously, I don't agree with a lot of the teachings of the Bible. I actually, a few weeks ago, I started a YouTube channel that kind of just dissects Bible stories that I was told as a child. Basically, I research and read the scriptures that explain the story, and then I retell it in my own words, and I stop and point out, if the God of the Bible has done this thing where he thinks that it's okay, like for example, the story of Lot. I don't know if are you familiar with that story and that well enough? Was
Lot the story? No, I'm thinking about Job. No, I've probably heard the story of Lot, but I can't recall it right now.
So Lot lived in Sodom, and these angels came and told Lot, hey, you need to get out of the city because God's going to destroy it. Because the city is so full of sin. And then this mob of gay rapists show up, and they're like, hey, give us those angels so we can rape them. And Lot is like, no, that's terrible. Rape my virgin daughters instead. And that's like a, what? That's a story that's always made me go, what? You know, because it's a story that my parents read to me as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, it was like, that's a little disturbing.
What's the moral here?
And yeah, exactly. But the thing is, when people read the Bible, they're looking for morals. So even if it's a terrible story with no moral value, they will look for one, and they'll find a bad one.
Yeah.
That's the issue to me, I guess, with religion and with believing in things even if they just give you comfort, because it's a really good way to get bad ideas if you're looking for moral value in something that doesn't necessarily have any. Because then you'll make one up, and it's probably not going to be good, because it's not coming from something that's trying to give you good moral values, or it's trying to give you moral values, but morality has definitely gotten a lot better in the past 1,000 or so years, the human sense of morality. So I wouldn't think, well, heterosexual rape is definitely better than homosexual rape, so this makes sense. Like, no, it doesn't make sense. Rape is bad, period. I feel like that's a pretty straightforward example.
Blanket statement, no rape. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Just don't rape. Rape's bad. Don't do that. But according to the Bible, it's not that simple. And it's like, yes, it literally is that simple. And if you try to get your morality from the Bible and you still reason, well, they were wrong about some things, then why not just throw the baby out with the bathwater and just say, maybe I should get morality from my own head and not try to get it from something that I have to interpret a certain way to make it fit with secular morality. Just use secular morality in the first place.
Yeah, I get that. So it's like, you can, if you want to raise your kids religious, like, all right, like, that's your choice, religious freedom. I'm all about that. But like, isn't it enough to say, don't steal from somebody, don't perform random acts of violence, don't rape, don't harass, don't abuse, don't oppress, only for the sake of the fact that you wouldn't want them to do that to you. Like, isn't that enough?
Without a guilt tripping thing. Yeah, I would agree with that. And like you said, people have every right to believe whatever they want to believe. And I don't think we should go around, banning religions. Like, for example, right now, Jehovah's Witnesses are banned in several countries, including the most prominent probably being Russia. They are labeled an extremist group, which I would agree that they are, but they're completely underbanned. And Jehovah's Witnesses have this massive persecution complex. So banning them just makes them think they're more right. So it just gives me a headache. But yeah, I think that everybody should have the right to believe what they want, but you have to go, whoa, no, your baby's getting a blood transfusion. I'm sorry that violates your religious standards, but I'm not just gonna. You can't just not do that.
Yeah, right, and I hate to keep going back to this. Like, I'm sure that if a Jehovah's Witness hears this, then they're gonna say that it's like, there's a whole lot more to Jehovah's Witnesses than just the blood transfusion thing. That's totally true. But like, I do want to address that one more time, and I'm glad that you brought it up. It's one thing if you're an adult. You know what I mean? It's one thing if you're over 18 and you have the ability to choose for yourself. Like, all right, like, I don't approve of random acts of violence, but like, if two boxers wanted to get into a ring and fight each other, that's their consensual right to do so. And I don't have any issue with that. You're talking about a kid. You're talking about somebody who has no say in the matter. And you're saying you're making the decision for this kid that they can't do that. And
the crazy thing is, sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say that's
the crazy
completely
thing
wrong.
Is they often convince the kids to say the same thing. I said this: if a doctor tried to give me a blood transfusion, and my parents lost the court case and they were going to give me the blood transfusion, I would kick and scream like I was about to be raped. They convince the kids of this stuff too. They, as far as I know, for the most part, they are also going along with it because they are just as devout. Or at least they often convince them to be. I haven't heard of, well, of course, I guess that I wouldn't have heard of, any kids that wanted a blood transfusion and their parents said no. As far as I know, all the cases I've heard were obviously of ones where the kids and the parents were all in agreement and the evil doctors just wanted to make them have a blood transfusion anyway. But,
well, I mean, kids will parrot back whatever you ask them to do. I mean,
right. But if they're not really old enough to understand, you know, this medical procedure, like, to be fully informed about this decision, then, you know, I mean, you could reject anything just because you don't know what it is. And as a child, you know, I mean, I certainly rejected evolution because I didn't know what it was. The whole, you know, if we came from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? That was a legitimate question. At least I thought it was a legitimate question. And I never asked it, but I heard it, and I was like, yeah, I guess. But then somebody was like, oh, well, that's because we didn't come from monkeys. Both monkeys and us descended from a common ancestor. And I was like, oh, that makes sense as well. You know, like, I just, like, oh, there's the explanation. You know, I didn't ask questions that I, you know, just to stump people.
Right.
Like, I heard a lot of apologetics, even when I believed in a God, even as a theist and a devout Jehovah's Witness, that I specifically didn't use, because I was immediately like, there's some logical holes in that. I'm not going to use that argument. It doesn't sound like a good argument, because I still believed I was right, but basically I just believed that I have always considered myself a pretty logical, critical thinking person, but I decided basically that I couldn't logically argue for God. And I wasn't going to try to. And I thought that was silly, because every logical argument that I had heard for God, I always was like, that's got some holes in it. I don't know about that. Like, don't get me wrong. I still believe in a God, but I'm not going to use that argument. That sounds like a bad argument.
Right. Were you raised into a community also that was, that like, were you surrounded physically? You know, like neighbors that were Jehovah's Witnesses, or were you in like a pocket that had a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses?
I guess that there were, like, in the city that I lived in, I think that there were maybe like 3 or 4 Kingdom Halls. I don't remember exactly how many. I guess not a lot physically, but the thing is, Jehovah's Witnesses are pretty much commanded to not be friends with worldly people. Like, basically, their friend group should be, their close friend group at the very least, should be exclusively Jehovah's Witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is, you know, there's the scripture, bad associations spoil useful habits. You know, there's the idea that, you know, if they're not making your faith stronger, they're making it weaker. These are all the things that I heard. And I believe that, I agree that that's true, because being friends with worldly people did, in fact, weaken my faith. But that was because I was just introduced to new ideas that I would not have gotten, you know, from the, you know, basically just the parrot Jehovah's Witnesses. You know, like, I'm saying, they and I are saying all the same things, and we're completely in agreement. So, yeah, of course, that's not going to make my faith any weaker, because we believe exactly the same thing.
Right.
And, yeah, getting new ideas introduced to me is probably going to make me think something different, or at least introduce the idea. So I understand, like, they're not wrong. Being friends with worldly people did weaken my faith, but I realize now that was a good thing. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't recognize that at the time.
Yeah. I mean, I've long held the belief, and you said it also about, you know, just Harry Potter. It's something that's come up with a few people that I've spoken with, and, you know, like, I love the Harry Potter movies, but I enjoyed them when I was a Christian as well, because I think for me it's like, I always felt as though if you've listened to my shows, like, I think I probably said this already, so I apologize about being redundant. It's like, you know, if there is if something like Harry Potter could make you lose your faith, like, your faith is pretty weak to begin with.
Exactly. I mean, witnesses are very restrictive about entertainment.
Right.
They don't have like a list or anything of stuff that you're not allowed to read or watch, but they make it pretty clear that violent material, anything rated R, anything that is sexually explicit, anything that, you know, promotes homosexuality, anything that is magical or occult. There were scenes in animated Disney movies that my parents always skipped, you know, like, and there are still some to this day that I haven't watched, you know. I finally watched the Harry Potter series because my future sister-in-law is a huge Potterhead, and it was just like, you know what, I have to watch these. Everybody's seen them. It's a huge pop culture thing for my generation. I just have to watch them. And I felt a little bit robbed because even though I enjoyed them, I realized that if I had watched these as a little kid and I'd read all the books and I was super excited about each movie coming out, it would have meant a lot more to me because I was like, this was fine. This was good. I enjoyed it. But I realized that it would have had a lot more value nostalgically if it had been a part of my childhood like it was everybody else's.
Right. Like and also it's like when I think about the things that made me lose my faith, I mean, I don't put Harry Potter in that list at all. You know?
Yeah.
It's like, it's just, and they're just good movies. Like it's a good story, and that's really all there is to it. You know, it's like, it seems like it's a valuable thing to learn, but it seems kind of stupid that like it's seen as something that could make you, I mean, even question your faith. I mean, I don't think there was anything in those books or movies that was promoting you to be a wizard.
It's not like they were saying it was real. Like like everybody who read it knew it was fictional. You know, nobody's saying go out and practice magic. And that's another thing that with Witnesses was that they definitely believed that magic and demons were and psychics were real, and that they could get you like possessed and stuff like that. And that was also something that even when I was out of the religion for a little while, supernatural things were like, oh, I don't fuck with that. Not at all.
Right.
No, thank you. Not like Harry Potter, but just like actual occult stuff. Like, my fiance's brother is a paranormal investigator, and we'd had some brief discussions about it, and I was basically just like, I don't do that stuff. I don't go anywhere near it. Not going to happen. One time when I was in high school, I don't remember if you remember that, like, Charlie thing. That was some kind of, like summoning a ghost or a demon or something like that. I remember somebody was doing that in class, and I literally got my Bible out of my purse and it was a pocket-sized Bible that I kept in my purse. And I set it on my desk. And I was just like, if anything happens, I'm ready to exercise some bitches. That was my mentality. It was just like, it's like, this is real, and they're really about to summon a demon, and I'm really about to save all of them.
Yeah.
Like, I thought that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, this just seems ridiculous. Like, I guess I'm gonna, since I'm the only holy person in this room, I guess I'm ready to exercise if necessary.
Yeah.
I didn't tell them to stop or anything. I just sat on the other side of the room with my little Bible, and I was like, well, if this goes south, I guess that I'm prepared.
I got this, you guys.
Yeah, basically, I was like, I got this.
Oh, man. I don't remember that Charlie thing. But, I mean, it rings a bell, but, like, yeah, I can see that happening. Like, if that's awesome. Oh, wow. So in the community, you know, whether it was with your family or with you know, just the people that did gather at that church, was there a political lean with people?
So here's something people don't know about Jehovah's Witnesses. They are all politically neutral. They do not vote. They do not participate in political discussions. They don't. They are not allowed to have political opinions. When Donald Trump got elected, one of the governing body members, and the governing body is basically like a bunch of old dudes that run things, got on a program and basically was like, listen, this one time this guy got elected in my country, and I was like, that guy's an idiot, but I was wrong for saying that, so don't say it. Basically, the witnesses are not allowed to have a political opinion. The idea is we're no part of the world, you know, that's all Satan's world, and nothing that happens right now matters because God's going to come in after Armageddon and fix everything. So trying to, you know, participate in politics for social and economic change is pointless. It's totally pointless. And so just don't. I mean, voting is, I think that voting is another thing you can get disfellowshipped for. I could be wrong about that, though. But I know that registering to vote made me feel pretty happy. But yeah, as far as I mean, I've known some Jehovah's Witnesses who've said things that make me think, you're kind of conservative. And obviously, I'm pretty sure my dad would be pretty liberal if he were, not a witness. According to the things that he has said to me, in my head, his political leanings, he has even said, like, the words like, I'm sympathetic towards the LGBT community because of the oppression that they're going through and blah, 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 blah. And I've never, it makes me think that he would probably be pretty liberal as I am. But Jehovah's Witnesses are actually not supposed to participate in politics at all. Yeah.
You're right.
I know.
I didn't know that at all. I had no idea that they didn't.
That's one of those things that's one of the stranger things that they believe that people don't know about. And it always makes them go, what? Really?
Huh.
Yeah, that's one of them.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Huh. And you said that you're on the liberal side of things these days?
I am I'm black, I'm gay, and I'm female. I don't have much of a choice if I, want to do anything for myself. But to be kind of liberal. At least that's my idea on it anyway. Is I don't know what else I would do. I mean, and I'm an atheist, I especially at least in America, conservatives tend to be very religious, and they tend to blur the line between separation between church and state. A lot of conservatives are, trying to ban abortions, and a lot of them are trying to reverse the gay marriage law and things like that. And I feel like I would be actively working against myself if I aligned myself conservatively. So, yeah.
Would you say that that race has played any role in not necessarily like your deconversion, but like in the time that you were in the Jehovah's Witnesses? Like, did you see that affecting you, your family, your father, and anybody else?
Not really, and that's because Jehovah's Witnesses do put a great bit of emphasis on racial harmony, because I think it's another thing to be like, listen, this isn't the us versus them that we need. It's us versus them, Jehovah's Witnesses versus the world, not blacks versus whites, not any of that. They go out of their way to make it clear how great they are about race equality, at least within the church system. That's never been a factor, at least as far as they say. I'm sure that they do have a racial history because everybody does, but at least in the modern day era, that is something that they have bragging rights about. But so no, as far as I know, that's never affected me. I don't feel like I've never met a Jehovah's Witness who was outright racist.
Right.
Or even that I felt was being subtly racist towards me. I've never seen a congregation that was exclusively of one color. Racial harmony is something that I grew up with that I am grateful for from that community, because there was a lot of, separation on a lot of things, but that wasn't one of them. I've never met a racist Jehovah's Witness. I'm sure that they exist, don't get me wrong, but if they were, they would not be allowed to be out about that.
Right.
They would never socially be allowed to be outright racist.
Do you think a racist would get disfellowshipped?
Probably. Maybe if they caused enough discord in the congregation, it's very possible.
So I was not. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that I think that would be the case. If they, and not just for holding those feelings, I guess necessarily, they'd probably get counseled about it. But if those racial prejudices led to any kind of discord in the congregation, or any kind of disputes or incidents, I think that it would have the potential to lead to a disfellowshipping offense.
Yeah, and they seem to put a lot of emphasis on action rather than just like thought, and not to say that they approve of all thought.
Not to say that thought crime isn't a thing.
Right,
don't get me wrong.
Right.
They have the whole, if you look at a woman lustfully, then you've already committed adultery in your heart. And that's something they believe, don't get me wrong. but they say, you know, like feelings lead to thoughts, thoughts lead to actions, you know, etc. But as far as something that you can actually be disciplined for, you know, if you have a wet dream, you're not gonna get disfellowship for that. If you knowingly and habitually masturbate, that's going to be an issue. But, you know, just involuntary stuff involving your thoughts, you should do your best to keep your thoughts clean. And thoughts can lead to action, so you need to curb it at the beginning. But you're not going to be punished just for the thoughts.
Right. And it was like what you were talking about earlier. Well, it's like, you know, you're right. There are sins relating to thoughts, like, you know, apostate thoughts, like just even considering is not okay. But, you know, you were also talking about, like, you know, your parents thought that it was okay that you were bisexual because you weren't actually in a polyamorous or a homosexual relationship at the time. It was just the fact that you were thinking about it, or like that you realized you had those feelings, that was actually kind of okay. So it's like they would counsel a racist. However, if that person was maybe seen at like a white nationalist rally or something like that, then that would be potentially.
That would probably be that could very easily potentially be a disfellowshipping offense. Like if somebody found out that they were at something like that, yeah. That I could definitely see somebody getting disfellowshipped for something like that.
Right. So I want to say, first of all, that I was not expecting to find so many similarities between what you experienced in the Jehovah's Witnesses and what I experienced with Quakerism. How it's like, you know, there are these things that like they put out there as being such good things. You know, they're not racist. They're accepting. You know, they believe in it's ultimately an incredibly peaceful thing. It's like when you kind of get deeper into it, you see that whether it's for these purposes that are really destructive or not, that they are destructive. You know, it's crazy. Like I was talking to I published an episode with somebody who was a Pentecostal, and it was like they did all this work where like they went out and worked in food kitchens. They tried to bring people in, but then ultimately the whole purpose of it was because they wanted to form an army of God, because it was all about the end times. You know, they didn't actually care about people being healthier or you know, getting off the streets. I mean, maybe they did, like, you know, fundamentally, but
a lot of individuals probably cared about that.
Right. But the purpose was because they needed to strengthen, you know, the military that would fight against Satan's army. You know, and I doubt that Jehovah's Witnesses exist for the purpose of not letting people get blood transfusions, but it's like it's this thing that happens and it's damaging. You know,
extremely.
And that's been fascinating because it's like, you know, like I said, like walking away from Quakerism made people in my Quaker meeting believe that I was going to be a violent person, and it's like, no, I'm not. I just, you know, you just make this one thing, but there's this other level. There's an extremism to that is that's destructive on a personal level and on a societal level, and you know, they just don't see it that way. So I've been really fascinated as we've been talking to see such similarities. You know, that you know, you described that they were talking about being pacifist, like yeah, like it seems so nice until you actually see what it does.
And they are really, really nice. Like everybody who has classmates and workmates, and anybody who has employees that are Jehovah's Witnesses are like, they're awesome. Not only are they really polite and really hard workers, but they work on holidays because they don't celebrate them. It's great. Like like they're very lovable, nice people, even though they keep everybody at arm's length. But yeah, ultimately, I think it's a very destructive force. And another problem that really goes unnoticed is the sheer amount of people that get disfellowshipped and how many families that's destroyed, and the high suicide rate of shunned Jehovah's Witnesses. It's really bad. I mean, especially, and it makes me really upset because if this was a mainstream Christianity thing, I couldn't be mad at Jehovah's Witnesses in particular, but it's not. It's
Right.
a very loosely based supposedly scriptural practice that damages a lot of people, that changes their lives. Like I said, I pretty much would be the happiest person on earth if I could still be with my family. Like I'm extremely content in my life right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy with who I am. I'm happy with who I'm becoming. I have goals for the future. I spent like my last few teenage years believing I was going to die in Armageddon because I wasn't good enough and I couldn't be good enough, and I kept trying to make all these changes in my life that just weren't happening, and I didn't have any goals for the future. Everything seemed so bleak
Right.
for me. And now I'm like, just, I have a future to look forward to. I have plans for the future. I plan to get married. I plan to maybe have kids someday. I have friends who I care about and who care about me. But honestly, I have never been alone since I left. And I think that if I had been alone for any significant amount of time, the longer I've been out, the more I've had this crushing depression about my family. Because, like I said, I grew up in a very tight-knit family. We all lived really close together. We've always been there for each other. And now I am completely without that resource. And all of the other people that I've known my whole life, really, up until, like, when I left, I basically just had my two friends. I had my boyfriend and my girlfriend, and I had my friend that I was living with, and that was pretty much it. I had one other member of my family who was disfellowshipped, one of my aunts, and my cousin who was her daughter that never got baptized. So they don't shun her because she never got baptized in the first place.
Right.
So, she can't get disfellowshipped because she never got baptized.
Mm-hmm.
But they lived a little ways away from me. They weren't close enough to my job to be really to be of a lot of help to me, although they did help me. There were a couple nights that I spent there that I could have spent on the street, and I'm really grateful to them for that. And I feel bad now too, because I also shunned my aunt when I was in, because she was she's been disfellowshipped for a long time. And I know that the rest of my family still loves and cares about her, but they do not and cannot talk to her.
Right.
And I never thought about it and now I realize that this whole practice is extremely cruel, to the point that, they know what they're doing, in the literature, it has said things about, the reason that we do this is not only to keep the congregation morally and spiritually clean, but to make the person who's doing the sinning rethink it. Because they've even said things like, if you talk to your kid even once, that might be enough to that might be enough to hold them over for a little while and keep them out of the truth longer. So if you want them to come back, don't talk to them at all. And my mom hasn't done that, to be honest. She's kept in contact with me a little bit. When I first, I contacted her to say, hey, I'm going on a doctor's visit. Is there any medical history I need to know about that I need to tell my doctor? And when I first started, when I called her every time that I moved to give her my new address. And we might talk for a little bit. When I first started dating my now fiance, she was like, hey, you were dating girls before, but now I need to know if you're on birth control. You need to get on birth control. I don't want to be a grandparent yet. And I was like, okay, I'm trying to get on birth control. Yeah, it's fine. And I've always been able to have very frank conversations with my parents about sex. I think their idea was that if they don't talk to me about sex, then the world is going to teach me about sex, and they didn't want that. The world taught me about sex anyway, and it taught me more than they did. I remember I had a conversation with my mom maybe a year or two before I left. My mom was sitting in the car with me and my sister, who's older than me by a year, and she was telling us, listen, you guys, the first time that you have sex, it will be painful, so maybe using some lube would help. And I was like, well, I read that if you're sufficiently aroused, it shouldn't hurt at all. And she was like, I didn't know that. And that made me so sad. Like, oh, you didn't know that?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Oh, like, that just made me so depressed. Like, really? Ooh. That's like, first of all, that's a really basic thing not to know after having been married for a long time and having 3 kids. That made me so sad. I was like, oh, no.
Yeah, that is sad.
Yeah. And yeah, that's sad. Like, I don't want to think that I have only, like, been sexually active for a year and had better sex than my mom has ever had in her life. That's so sad to think.
Yeah.
But it's, evidently it's true. And I was just like, I'm pretty glad that I've learned, this kind of stuff from the world as well. But it's just like, all of this stuff comes back to, she was raised a witness. She never, and I'm sure her parents were probably not as progressive about her sex education, even as she was with ours,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, there's a lot of witnesses that are very emotionally, like, repressed. When I was probably 11, I discovered masturbation. And like I said earlier, there were a lot of rules with witnesses that I didn't know because people just kind of expected that I knew it, so nobody actually told me because I was raised around it. And then I found out masturbation was bad, and I was like, oh, shit, I've been doing that a lot.
Yeah.
I didn't, and I was like, oops. And then I told my mom about it, and then she was like, okay, well, I understand these are natural feelings that Jehovah gives you, but at the same time, you have to save it for marriage. And there was a point when I was like, well, why would God give me these feelings at 11 then, if I'm supposed to wait until marriage? Like, why wouldn't I get them at, like, I don't know, later, just at a time that I can actually get married,
Mm-hmm.
And now I realize it's because it was, that's just not how it works at all. It's just a biological thing.
Right.
But at the time, it was just like, well, then God's mean. Because I want to have sex now. Like, I don't know what that is now. I don't know. I really fully understand what that means. But this doesn't seem awful. And I would, try really hard not to. Like, I would even keep a calendar, and nobody else knew what it meant but me. But if I would either mark the day as it passed with a green check mark or a red X, depending on whether or not I was successful in resisting temptation. And I think the longest I went was 3 months. And then I was just having a really hard time sleeping. And I was like, you know what helps me relax? Masturbating.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to sleep. It was like, this was a totally normal biological function. And I realize that now. And at the time, I was just like, oh, I'm horrible. I'm the worst. And it's just like, really?
Yeah.
Why would we put that on, like kids? Like, I remember listening to the podcast with Morris, and he felt very similarly, thinking about, it made him feel terrible, and he thought of himself as like a sex addict. And then when he thought about his son, he was like, you know what? This whole thing is perfectly normal. And I don't want my kid to feel this way. And, that's something that I thought at the time was like, why would God make me want to feel this way? This seems like not that bad. And, yeah.
Yeah. And you know what, like, I remember, if there's anybody that listens to this and tells me that I'm wrong, then that's fine. But I remember, I think reading that Muhammad Ali didn't masturbate for a few days leading up to a big fight, and how he thought that apparently there was something that he learned, and he was Muslim, but I don't think I don't think it was specifically a Muslim thing. That was the reason for it. It was just that he believed that it would heighten his senses, and it would let him release that rage or something, whatever you want to call it, when he stepped into the ring. That has even actually been disproven. So there are so many weird taboos and myths that surround sex and masturbation, and I think a lot of it is religious, because otherwise those taboos wouldn't exist, as far as I know, because nobody else thinks outside of a religious context,
that's treated as perfectly normal.
Right.
You know, I don't think that those taboos would even exist without all these, you know, weird religious doctrines surrounding sex and masturbation.
Yeah. Yep. Wow.
Yeah, I think that covers it.
I mean, I think that was everything. That was awesome. I mean, was there anything else that you wanted to say? Anything that that I didn't get a chance to ask about, or anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to be able to say to, you know, other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, other atheists, other people that are questioning their religion, whatever it may be? You know, just anything else that you wanted to say?
I guess the final topic that I just really wanted to touch on really briefly was preaching. I feel like we didn't really touch on that at all. That's like the thing that witnesses are the most famous for.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
is the door-to-door ministry work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're pretty much mandated to do that. The idea is that if you like people, then you should want to save their lives. Plus, God says you have to. So there you go.
Right.
They keep pretty strict track of how much preaching you do. They have like specific like titles for people who can make a certain amount of hours each month. My sister, I heard from my mom, has become a regular pioneer, which basically means that she has to preach for 70 hours a month, which is like kind of a job. Like,
yeah,
it's crazy. And it's not like, you know, the Mormons have their mission, but for witnesses, this is your entire life. Literally from like as soon as you are old enough to hand someone a pamphlet, you are expected to preach.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that they emphasize a lot, and it's not even all that successful. But they're mandated to do it. And I know a lot of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses will remember this. There's a lot of boring days in service where you, especially as a little kid, where you're just riding in the car and you're waiting for lunch. Like seriously, that was like the highlight. Was like, okay, I know that we have to do this for a couple of hours, but then where are we having lunch? I need to know. McDonald's, Tim Hortons, where? Like, are we going back to my house? Are we going to have to eat somewhere fancy? But that was like the highlight for kids. There was it's just like it's the hallmark of Jehovah's Witnesses. And the problem with that is another thing is they kind of make it so that everybody that you meet is not a potential friend, but a potential convert, basically. Mm-hmm. Like in school, all of my classmates were considered my special territory for preaching to. Like it is my mission to try to preach to and convert at least some of them. And I tried to, but I was more interested in making friends than I was preaching. So I didn't try that hard.
Right.
And I'm glad I did it because it would have driven away the couple of friends that I had, and I don't know if I would have ever left. But yeah, that's I guess the last thing I just wanted to briefly touch on is that's a thing that we do. It's a real thing. People ask me if how many doors I had knocked on. Somebody asked me that once, and I just looked at them like, I don't think you understand how this works. Like, it's not like I've just preached in a neighborhood one time. Right. Like, I've done this my whole life. Even before I can remember doing it, I've done it. Mm-hmm. So I have no idea. It probably numbers in the thousands, or at least the hundreds, but probably the thousands. I don't know. It was like, that's one of the weirdest questions I've ever received about being a Jehovah's Witness was how many doors did you knock on? And I was like, what?
Yeah, that's an odd question.
I don't know.
Like, why would anybody remember all of those doors? I mean, that's amazing.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know I wasted a lot of time doing it, but I don't remember how many doors specifically I knocked on.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that because you're right. That is a huge thing about Jehovah's Witnesses, and I guess I forgot to ask about it, but you're right. I mean, that's like that. I think when most people think about Jehovah's Witnesses, they think about somebody knocking on their door to ask them if they've heard the good news.
And I want to say, don't harass Jehovah's Witnesses when they come to the door. Don't. They have a huge persecution complex, so as soon as they walk away, they'll be like, well, Jesus was right. people hate us. It's like, no, people hate you because you're annoying, not because of your faith. And people don't even hate you. You just annoy them. It's just like an irritation when you're there. But nobody hates Jehovah's Witness except maybe some ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, you know?
Yeah.
And don't harass them for the other reason that they are incredibly brainwashed, and they don't know. They don't really understand that you don't care or that you couldn't possibly care. Like, I mean, they know it, but they will still try. They have to, as far as they are concerned. Don't make somebody's day miserable. Just don't answer the door in your underwear on purpose. Don't talk about being a devil worshiper.
Right.
Don't set the dogs on them. Don't send your kid to the door and be like, my mommy says she's not here right now. You know, I've had little kids answer the door and say their parents aren't home, and I was like, Jesus Christ, then why didn't you open the door?
Right.
You're a little kid. You shouldn't be here. Stranger danger. Teach your kids stranger danger. That's my other lesson for you. Please. Like, that scared me. Every time I would knock on someone's door and a kid would come and they would be like, my mom's at the grocery store right now, my dad's at work, and I'm like, don't tell me that.
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't know that. Don't tell me that. Oh my God. The kids, they leave their kids home, and then their kids tell strangers at the door that they're not home. Like, don't do that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God.
You're right.
That terrified me every time. I was like, well, I'm not going to kidnap you, but it's a good thing that I wasn't coming here to kidnap you, because I could have.
Right.
But yeah, so just don't harass witnesses, because A, they don't know any better, and they are just normal people that are trying to live their lives the best they can. They think they're doing the right thing, and harassing them is like, they're real people, you know? I've had the door slammed in my face, even as a kid, you know, and that really sucks. That really ruined my day sometimes, but it also made me even more sure that we were right. It gave me, in some ways, even more confidence to go to the next door and do it to somebody else. You know, the best way to get rid of witnesses is to answer the door, listen to what they say, and then say, can you put me on your do not call list? And then they will, you know. They might check in maybe like once a year to make sure you still want to be on their do not call list, but, you know, that's it. You don't have to harass them to get rid of them, and definitely don't take their literature if you want them to leave, because they'll just come back. You know, it's like feeding a stray cat. If you put you're like, get out of here, but you've given them food, so they're gonna get out of there, and then they're gonna come back. You know, if you want them to leave, don't take the literature. Just tell them to put you on a do not call list, and don't set your dogs on them. I mean, what the hell? Don't do that.
Yeah.
To anybody. I mean, even if they're trespassing, even if the sign says no soliciting, people bring their kids with them. Don't do that, you know?
Yeah. I really appreciate
I guess that's my last message, is just don't harass witnesses, please.
Yeah. I really appreciate you saying that, because, you know, I think that it's important to remember that, like, when you do criticize religion, like, that's okay. You know, religion deserves criticism just as much as anything else does. But
yeah,
you know,
I don't think that there's any ideas or beliefs that go above criticism. And if when we start doing that, that's when we start leaving the door open for bad ideas.
Right. Right. And, you know, I have full intention of, like, you know, teaching my kids, you know, about, like, what the Bible and the Quran and what Buddha said, and, you know, all these different things. And then and saying, like, I don't believe, but you might, and other people do. So, you know, respect that. And here's why they believe it. But that doesn't, you know, that there's a big difference between saying that you don't agree with what the Jehovah's Witnesses believe, or their interpretation of the Bible, or what they're doing with their specific type of scripture that they have. But there's a big difference between saying that you don't agree with that, and that you're skeptical of it, and then saying that somebody's character is 100% determined by that.
Yeah, like I said, I think that it's a high control doomsday cult. You know, like I think that it's dangerous. I think that it's terrible. I think that it hurts a lot of people. I think that it's killed people. killed people. But I don't think the people in it are all necessarily bad.
Right.
I think that they are all necessarily quite brainwashed, because I was quite brainwashed, and I know that I held beliefs that were contrary to what I actually thought and felt. And I just believed them because I was just raised that way. And harassing people and hurting people is not a good way to get them to wake up. I had people that would harass me online even. Like on my Tumblr, people would message me and be like, "Are you still in that brainwashed cult?" And instead of explaining to me why it's a brainwashed cult, they would just start, like, if you're trying to wake me up by instigating a fight, then obviously that's not going to work. Is your goal to harass me or is your goal to help me? Because people who try to convince Jehovah's Witnesses that maybe some of their doctrine is wrong and try to get them to wake up, I do not discourage that. I wouldn't discourage somebody from going up to a Jehovah's Witness and being like, "Can you explain to me what the scriptural basis is for this blood transfusion thing?" Like, because that doesn't make sense to me. And trying to convince them that doesn't make sense, I wouldn't, arguing with a Jehovah's Witness about the doctrine and about the beliefs, I would not discourage. But just harassing them, just trying to start a fight about their beliefs is only going to make them dig their heels in, and it's only going to ruin their day. And it's happened to me, and it's happened to countless other witnesses, and it doesn't help at all. It makes it worse. So, and it's just not nice, like, what's the point?
I think a lot about having to work with people who have opposing views to achieve a common goal. I want there to be unity between theists and non-theists, and I'm sure there are thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses who firmly believe that it's okay to distrust their tears as they risk their children's lives by denying them blood transfusions, and yet do other things to positively contribute to society, which I may not do. Since I spoke with Rachel, other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses have contacted me, one of whom really helped me to work through some feelings I was having about tolerance, and to what extent compromise with people who hold opposing views is actually valuable. Being raised on the left side politically made me believe that we need to be willing to accept everyone, and that is a defining trait of being an advocate for human rights. As I've been doing this show more, though, I've begun to believe that there is a difference between advocating for human rights and respecting the views of every person, because that's like saying I need to give some merit to a view promoting, for example, another Holocaust. This is, of course, an extreme example. But the point I'm trying to make is that there is such a thing as a bad, useless idea not worth exploring, and there is no valuable compromise between being anti-Holocaust and pro-Holocaust. So, when I realized I don't believe all views deserve tolerance, the question became how I, personally, would differentiate between an idea that should be tolerated and one that shouldn't. The nature of my show led me to a few practical starting points that helped. First of all, I support apostates, as well as theists who may disagree with but do not persecute apostates, which means I also believe non-theists should be open to theists who promote reform. I also believe if something is true, then it is not threatened by facts. Therefore, free thought, skepticism, and criticism should be encouraged among both theists and non-theists. No people should only be given enough information to corroborate a view. Rather, they should be given as much information as possible, and questions to the contrary should be welcomed. Starting with just this, how should I treat Jehovah's Witnesses who stand for shunning apostates and who discourage free thought, as well as the teachings that empower them to do so? Well, witnesses are typically taught that the world outside of theirs is cruel. So I say, we show them that we aren't. These days, people who get furious receive much more attention than those who don't. But they're not actually doing much more than stoking the fire and empowering their own brand of extremism. To be fair, I get it. And I believe anger is an excellent catalyst. It provides adrenaline to get you going and keep you moving. But it isn't sustainable. I implore you to instead learn from Daryl Davis, a black musician who's convinced around 200 KKK members to give up their hoods and robes, not by yelling at them in the street, but by sitting and talking with them in his home. It is incredibly difficult to show humanity to people who oppose you, and I agree that people who dehumanize have done nothing to earn dignity. But Daryl Davis is evidence that it works better than fighting extremism with extremism. So let out your anger with your friends. Then, when you're really ready to solve the problem, go buy a coffee for a Jehovah's Witness. A link to a TED Talk from Daryl Davis is in the description. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review and share it with someone you trust. For immediate updates and discussions, follow the show on Twitter @OutFoldPodcast. Special thanks to Rachel for approving all of this conversation being shared. Logo and artwork by my wife. Production by my wife and I. All music by me. Please make sure to support Rachel by checking out her YouTube channel, Ex-Cult Baby. This has been Out of the Fold.